But when we talk about all of these issues of digital transformation, of digital rights and access, we have to remember that we are here in this room and those people in our newsrooms in a privileged position. I think everybody in here is probably busy tweeting, commenting, doing whatever on their smartphones. But the reality is that for almost 4 billion people globally, there is no access to the internet. Now that's many women, girls, it's people in rural regions, it's senior citizens, those with a lower income and lower education levels. Our next two guests are both from Africa, but this issue of digital equality is not just an issue of the global south. In fact, it's a problem we see in continents around the world, even in the United States. We just saw a picture there of Detroit, and many people might not have realized that poverty exists in the United States. But a recent study that came out from Pew Institute actually said that 11% of the US population still has no access to the internet. That's incredible in a country as industrialized as the US is. So you can imagine in countries of Africa, in Asia, in South America, that the situation is even much more dramatic. But what does that mean to us in society? What are the challenges we face, and why do we need to be concerned about that? Our two guests are going to be talking about, now that we have a nice table for us to stand at, our two guests are going to be talking about why we need to be concerned about digital inequality. So I'd like to ask Nanjira, Sambuli, and Emilar Gandhi to join me up here at the table. Let me just introduce them. Nanjira, here, green, is a Nairobi-based researcher and analyst. She leads the Web Foundation's efforts to promote digital equality. And Emilar Gandhi is Facebook's public policy manager for the Southern African Development Company. So we heard about some of the issues at the very end of Georgie's talk about women and media. So I'm very happy that we have two women here in influential positions to talk to us about the issue of digital equality. So I'd like to start first to break it down. Afterwards, we'll talk for a few minutes, and then we'd like to open it up for people to ask questions. I'm assuming there are lots of journalists here, and journalists always have questions. So we'll take a bit of time to just kind of touch on the issues, and then we can hopefully get your good questions to stimulate the discussion even more. Before we go any further, let's just really quickly, Nanjira, what is digital equality for you?
Good morning, everybody. So it's it might sound a bit utopic, but it's the reality we're trying to achieve. It's basically that all digital technologies as we know them would be readily accessible with minimal barriers to anybody anywhere in the world. So for us at the Web Foundation, following on the mission of Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web and gave it away for free, the whole idea is how can it be for everyone? And so we look at that, everything from the inclusion aspect, how do we get people on the devices that we know some of us may take for granted, some people have never even had them come into their lives, into how once you're connected, you're also equal in society, you're equally able to participate, you're equally able to lend your voice. That's the vision for digital equality, much in the same way we've spoken about equality in society predating the digital.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not just an issue of access then. It's not an issue of device. It's much more than that. Do you agree, Emilio? How do you see digital equality?
Okay, so I see digital equality as more than access, obviously, but also about content. And content, not just the content that you receive, but also the content that you produce. So, I mean, it's at Facebook, following our mission of giving power to people to build the community that they would really want to be part of. You create content in the language that is relevant to you. Mm-hmm. You create not only text, because I think when we're talking about access, when you're talking about content, we always think about text. Mm. But as Africans, we are an oral culture. We are an oral people. We talk, we sing, we dance, and all these formats should be, I think, available to everyone.
It's all forms of communication.
So all forms of communications, and also giving you the power to actually create and develop that information that you'd want to share with your friends or with your colleagues.
Mm-hmm. But let me then ask you, okay, when we talk about issues of digital equality then, who do you see as the actors who need to be addressing this issue of digital equality? Who do you want to bring to the table to discuss this?
So firstly, I think it's I'll not say users, it's the people who use the platforms that that we have, obviously, you and I, everyone in this room, the journalists, the media, academia, and I also think there are government people here. So who...
And the platform owners?
Yes, of course, and also the tech industry. I mean, it's an ecosystem, and we do have to work in partnership with that. We do have developers, software engineers, and from the technical aspect. But we are also not only that. We do have teachers, people who actually develop some of the policies that are on our platform. But from the people that are in this room, access is just beyond, as we talked about, it's just beyond the devices. But also in creating an enabling environment that ensures that we actually can access that information. So when it comes to policy development, everyone has a role to play. It's not just government. It's not just the private companies like us, Facebook, but everyone in this room.
And how do you get that to happen?
Wow, that's always a fun question,
what is the
isn't
first
it?
step? What is the first step that you need to take?
I can only speak from it, from the perspective of how we work on this issue. So coming at it as independent civil society players in the technology space globally, we try and convene all these actors, government, private sector, academia, media, in country context, in regional context, to understand what are the barriers, what is keeping people from having access and meaningful use of the web or ICTs generally, what are the technical elements, so maybe the regulators are about spectrum, it goes as technical as that, or about over-the-top players, we're like in Uganda, you've seen a social media tax being introduced with the whole idea or policy warpedness around taming gossip. I mean, good luck with that kind of thing. But we have to get to the table and understand, why does the government think that way? Who needs to be able to bring evidence to the to show the government that this is not the best way to go about it. So it's a long, slow process in a space that is disrupted every day. And so there's the work everybody has to do, the heavy lifting everybody has to do, and have the magnanimity of time and patience to have these topics brought to the table, continually saying the same thing over and over again. But in our work, what we found it is encapsulating this element is, I would say, 5 elements: rights. For us, we believe that technologies at this point, and especially the internet, must be considered a public good and a human right. So the same rights I'm expected to enjoy offline surely must extend online.
But okay, now I'm just going to play the devil's advocate here.
Sure.
I mean, because digital access as a right is I get press, freedom of information, freedom of speech, but isn't that, don't we have more important things to concern about? Why should we go so far then for digital?
It's nice, though. It's 2018.
It is nice.
In 2018, we finally can get people to, there are more people who understand that access to digital technologies is no longer a luxury. Because I challenge anybody in this room to name any industry, any space that has not been disrupted by digital. So the same way we think about education, water, health, right there with all those other traditional elements is digital right now. That's how it's positioned itself. So it's really to just be on a road to nowhere to say it's a nice to have. We have a long list of things. Even in whatever, health, food security, digital has a role to play. It has permeated everywhere. Therefore, we have to have that same conversation with the same fervor and with the same urgency as any other thing we think is atop of the list of priorities.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, just quickly on, I think how we can also ensure that, we put internet access, I think, back at the top priority. Because I think when I go to some of these conferences, we tend to chase the newest thing.
We love devices, tools.
We love devices.
The faster, the better.
What she said. And also, you get into these conferences and people still talk, they talk about the most, difficult abbreviations that you can find and say, what does that mean? But I think we still need to put access back on the top of the agenda, access and connectivity. And how can we achieve that? One of the projects that we support as Facebook in Africa is the African Internet Governance School. And we've had some media practitioners come into that, into that. It's a school, it's a week-long school, where we interrogate, some of the policies, obviously, that are in Africa, but also learn from different, different stakeholders who are, coming from all over the world. Why that is important? Because I think as media practitioners, people who are probably in this room, if you, I think, want to, to add more value to the debates that are there, you also have to have the capacity to be able to do that. So that conversation, I think, helps. And I would challenge, I think, even people in this room to continue doing that, to continue learning more about tech policy, internet access, and also, ask questions as much as possible, particularly also even to us as private sector.
Yeah, let me ask you, because how many of you in this room are journalists or work in media? Okay, fewer than I thought, but still a good number, okay. But as a journalist myself here, and because Deutsche Welle is sponsoring this Global Media Forum, my question really, we have to talk about the role and the responsibility that media plays. So what can we as journalists do to push this? You say internet access has to be pushed to the top of the agenda. What do you think we as journalists could do? Or what should we do? Or what would you like to see us do more of?
Man, we need a whole day for this. But it's multifaceted. I think, first and foremost, as Emilar was saying, it's familiarize yourself with the subject matter. There's no way we will expect media to hold, say, Facebook or Google to account if they don't understand the subject matter. And if we look at the portfolio of work you have on covering technology access, for instance, it's just churning back the same PR statements, for example, that these companies have put out. And there's been no push to ask the deeper questions. The way we work at the Web Foundation is basically we try and create spaces to use a buzzword, multi-stakeholder processes. It's a buzzword, it's true, but it exists in some corners. But to bring everybody to the table to understand, when we say access, what do we mean by equal access? How do you challenge the whole idea of access into the internet being conceived as mobile first for Africa or Asia, while the rest of the world is thinking of, say, VR or laptops or whatever else? What kind of inequalities are being introduced there? It goes as granular as that. It goes as granular as the media industry itself asking, what is digital doing for them? Are you just playing at the same place of just churning out stuff in this information superhighway? Or you're creating content that actually gives people room for pause, that it gets them to actually interact deeper with subject matter, whether it's in technology itself or by leveraging these technologies for exactly that. And I look forward to the next segment of this day because that's coming up as well. So there are many layers. There's also media as willing parties or unwilling parties in this whole toxic space around technology and advertisements and trying to get money from us at every eyelash that we link together that goes up and down. You guys are trying to mint money off of that. There's a lot that is being up for questioning, and I think within the media there has to be a restructuring and a very conscious understanding that even media tech or internet is not just a department in social media or a department that you have on the side. It has to be integrated across the board, and it could go on. I could go on.
Hopefully we'll have some good questions about that in a minute, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I think for journalists, besides asking tough questions, I think you really do have a huge role to play, particularly when you're looking at access. You also have a content divide. So it's not just digital divide, but also in terms of content, relevant content, in a language that also is relevant to us, but also the content itself being relevant. And I mean, I would also really challenge the journalists who are here to produce content that is relevant, ask tough questions, but also I think interrogate not just access when it is available, but access when it is denied. Because I think in our region, we've had a lot of internet shutdowns, and besides just creating a hashtag about it, but really, researching more. Why is it the case? What are the issues behind that? What can we do about it? So also really looking at not just access when it is available, but access also when it is denied. I also think journalists and academia and people in this room have a really huge role to play in not just informing society, by just reporting, but also doing the research, really doing the research that informs evidence policy making. Because if we are going to have access that, equal access, there has to be evidence, there has to be research that supports that. There has to be information that we can all rely on, and we rely on you as media practitioners, not just as reporters, to be able to inform that.
And the audience, the journalists, they really need to know the audience. They need to know when you're talking about relevance, when you're talking about the context. And we're going to talk about, with our next speaker, a lot about that. But that's really important because often what happens is that the newsroom is quite advanced, adapting new digital technologies, new platforms, and the audience might not be moving as fast. So you need to be able to you need to do more and in a way that your audience can reach out to it. We're going to open up for some questions now, so just raise your hand. And before you start, could you please tell us where you're from? I think it's always interesting. So there are microphones coming over. We'll start with you. Oh, it's coming. And maybe if you have a question for one of the specific women up here, that would be good if you can address them directly then.
Thank you. My name is Makaya Bungano. I came from Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm here in Deutschland for 2 years and 6 months. I'm a journalist also. I did work in my country. I want to know, to ask a specific questions to the ladies about the journalists, the women. We do facing many problems, even in the Facebook, in a social, all those network social. And sometimes when we're doing nice our job, we are accused to expose ourselves. Maybe did you have one comment about it? And besides, we came from Africa. Women, as journalists, as women, we do have many problems with the social network. What are you guys doing just to help us to come out of that situation? Yeah. Thank you.
Good question. Yeah, let's start with Nanjira. You want to start?
Sure. One thing I always say when we're talking about digital equalities, inequalities, is everything we see manifesting on these platforms is just an extension of the issues we see offline. The same treatment we've seen of women offline is translating online, unfortunately. But actually, globally, 2 billion women are offline. This is only when we're going to get to a 50% mark of everybody having been online at least once every 30 days. Of the 50% who remain offline, 2 billion are women. So that tells you about what, the same inequalities, the same challenges that we've been seeing about women gaining access and agency to spaces is unfortunately translating to the digital space. And you're right, the moment a woman is trying to exercise their civic or political voice or their professional voice online, the same agents of patriarchy always come up and try and keep them down. But one thing I found, because there's no easy solution to it, obviously the platforms are trying to do very much as possible to have tools, safety tools and measures, and Emilar can speak to that. But I think linking it to the whole idea of women still claiming their spaces, if you and I still have the grit to keep going on there. I always celebrate women. Any woman who still shows up on these platforms every day, lends a voice, speaks to issues, is a champion in making it possible to reconfigure this understanding of the place of women. And I'll let Emilar speak to what the platforms are trying to do to make it safer for women online. But I celebrate you for trying to stay the course.
Yeah, I'll just quickly, I know we don't have a lot of time, but, I agree with Nanjira that, social media platforms are a mirror of what is happening in society. Those bullies that are offline do not magically become pastors when they are on social media. But as platforms, what we're doing, we actually do have a program where we work, it's called Safety for Journalists, and we can talk about it offline as well, but what we are trying to do really is working with organizations who are actually experts in the area to deliver this training to journalists, because I'm not a journalist, but what I know is that this can mean life and death when someone hacks into your account and expose your sources and all that. So we do really have some programs, but also it's also not just for journalists. Well, there is a unique program for journalists, but also it goes beyond that. It goes also around online safety, just for the people that use our platforms. And online safety, obviously, is something that we take very, very seriously, and it's something that we would really want to explore and work with different journalists. Not just online safety, but also maybe include offline safety if we can have experts that we can collaborate with that on.
Okay, let me ask you a question now about social media. It's something we talked about briefly yesterday. social media is great. It gives people a voice. It allows them to raise awareness, to point out injustices, to start a campaign going and whatnot. But you said social media is as a mirror of society. So problems you have offline are also online. Now, that's why I want to ask now, is social media, does it contribute to solving some of the problems of inequalities, or does it compound the problems, augment them, make them worse? Because what we're doing, we have cases where women, particularly women, but also other minorities, their voices are drowned out. They will then leave eventually, shut down their accounts. This is happening. We've seen it. Women are shutting down Twitter accounts or going off Facebook because of that harassment. So can social media really be an agent of change in this, or is it something that might actually be worsening the problem? Well, I mean, I'd ask the person from Facebook.
So I don't think that's a yes or no, or yes and no answer, because I think social media really gives, it has its own benefits. Like, it gives people that voice, to be civically engaged. And it's not just, being, using the social media in political engagements and all that, but also giving you the power to, for some, social media is like their store. It's where they make money. It's, the small businesses that are on our platforms. For some, is a space where they can use their skills. Yesterday, on a Monday, I talked about the developer circles that we have in Africa, where we have over 37,000 members, where they are using social media to develop tools that can be used by Facebook and that can be used by other technological companies. And that, for me, is power, to have that power to do something for yourself. Does it amplify the inequalities? I honestly, I don't think so. I really have to have someone say that. But I don't think they amplify the inequalities. There are challenges, of course, and we are doing something about it. But we cannot do it alone. So we cannot solve all those challenges alone. How can we work together with academia to solve some of those challenges? Like false news, we see some people being driven off, because of the issues that that they see. What can we do with academia? What can we do with journalists? And we are getting there, and we're really working hard to ensure that it happens.
Okay, Nanjira, do you want to talk about that?
Just to say, it's complicated, and as she said, it's. I just think it's a bit unfortunate if we have, media or any other actors getting us into this idea that we must look at the technologies and blame them for these things. Technology is not a silver bullet. No technology is going to be a panacea. Even if today you leave and you go back to your newsrooms and suddenly it's blockchain. Blockchain is not going to solve, this mesmerization with platforms. Let's understand that we are introducing these platforms in a context, in a space. Whoever is designing them, whoever is shaping them is coming from a certain context and space, and they're baking in those biases. We need to open up our thinking about how we analyze technology. We need the philosophical ways, we need the sociological ways, anthropological assessments to better understand, and it's not as simple a question really to resolve in 5 seconds.
No. Yeah, here's a question right here.
Yeah, my name is Julius Endert from the Deutsche Welle Academy, and I'm wondering why this is a little bit like an advertising session for Facebook, because you're from Nanjira, you're from Kenya, and you have witnessed the negative effects social media and Facebook had on your elections. And why don't we talk about the open internet, the opportunities you have with your own website, with your own blog, building up on open source? We always focus on Facebook. We always invite them, not something against you, but we always invite the people from the big platforms. But why don't we talk about the open internet? I'm getting a little bit angry because we see a lot of inequalities on Facebook. Those who are in power, who can afford to buy the 36 bloggers in Kenya or buy ad campaigns via Cambridge Analytica, those are the people who are causing inequalities on social media. And I'm wondering why we are getting the Facebook people along with this advertising talks here on this conference.
That ties into the question I had, is social media, and in this case, the big platforms, is it maybe contributing to inequality as opposed to helping it. Okay. So Nanjira, let's just maybe go into a little bit more about what you said.
It's always good to see you, first and foremost. And right, yes, it is on record very much that I am one of the more critical voices of platforms, and this idea that the web has come to be understood as a series of platforms, really 4 or 5 platforms. There's research that shows in certain parts of the world, you ask people if they use the internet, no. You ask them if they use a certain platform, they say yes, and to them, that platform is basically the internet. Now, having worked on this for many years and my soul feeling like that of 150, we can have, and we have to find a way to understand there's a nuance and the complexity to how we shape these conversations. I will never sign up for anything where we're just, going in on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and that's the end of the conversation. You're right, we need to figure out how to get back to the idea of the open web, but we have to have people understand that there's an inequality in how people have been introduced to the idea of the web. Some people only know platforms. How do we go back to that? That's where I challenge media. How are you guys writing about this? How are you exposing people? How are your own platforms built? Are they just mostly on these platforms? Do you have open source alternatives? So that we can also say that it's not just about critiquing, but we're leading by example. And it's a long conversation, and you're right, we need to keep having it. But yeah, no one is giving these guys an easy time.
Yeah, and she's from Kenya, I'm from Zimbabwe. I don't know if that is okay with you, but I'm an African who happens to work for Facebook, and this is not an advertising session for Facebook, but I was just responding to questions.
I think it's also important to note that we'll get back to the issue of context. Where is our audience, right? And if the audience, we need to address our audience, and if the audience is using a particular platform, then we have to work with these platforms. We have to use them critically. Yes, critically. Okay, any more questions out there? Okay.
Hi there, I'm Sertan Sanderson from Deutsche Welle, and I would like to know what role does the analog world and analog content still play while we're all fascinated by pushing forward the digital frontiers? We have a lot of analog content at Deutsche Welle still. We've cut back on some radio in the past few years, not so much affecting Africa, but other regions. But should we cut back more of that to have more funding for more digital initiatives? Or is it still important to have radio broadcasts and maybe more old-fashioned technologies to reach people, to keep them informed as objectively as possible? Or should we put our interests first and foremost in helping to push developing nations to get equal access to digital platforms?
So if I may just ask, when you say analog content, do you mean like audio clips on reels or videos stored in like old
radio
school
broadcasts
tapes?
at 5
He
p.m.
means
every
turning
day.
on the radio.
Yeah.
Right.
Finding the station.
Yeah, literally.
Tipping on the TV.
Moving the antenna, all that.
When you sing, I'm just assuming it's just radio, right?
No, newspapers.
Okay, newspapers and all that.
Books, all of that.
We don't deal in newspapers.
Yes,
but
But this is not a question about Deutsche Welle, it's a general question.
Yeah, I still think it's still relevant, and it's still a priority to do that. From the region where we are coming from, and this is why I think we have this session, we are talking about access. And when you're saying access, it's still not, we have less than 30% people who have access in sub-Saharan Africa. What about the 70%? So there's still a very huge need for that. But we also need not to forget the convergence that's there now between all the ICTs. But I think it's still very, very important to use, especially radio. I'm just thinking of the people that use all that. So it's still very, very relevant. But also I think the most important thing is the relevant content that you still need to put, even not just on the analog, but also on digital. So I think it's still very, very important.
And by the way, those are still technologies.
Yes.
So it's this, and I really am looking forward to the next talk because I know it's going to hammer down on this point. If you have good content, it doesn't matter whether you're broadcasting it via radio, via virtual reality, via blockchain, whichever technology is in vogue. If it is actually content that is relevant for a time, people will consume it. There are studies across the world that are showing people are also now just starting to, get offline a bit and just consume content slowly, and back in the old school way, flipping a newspaper with a cup of tea it's good for the Instagram look or whatever. But like people are going back to that. Vinyl is back. Vinyl is back. Society will always go back and forth with these ideas of technologies. It will just be tragic to fixate on, I don't know, the next thing is Deutsche Welle is just doing virtual reality content that cannot be used on other platforms. You could have a podcast and a radio show, and it's all the same content. You just have to understand where your audience is, what do they have as accessible, and maybe figuring out how do you also introduce the idea of interactivity with that content.
Mm-hmm. But I also just think quickly that I think when we're talking about access, also should not forget that it's not just a matter of being on Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram, but there are challenges around energy, around electricity. So even whatever platform that you use, when you're talking about access, I think we should not just think about the social media platforms, but about the lack of infrastructure, affordability of the of accessing the content, and in this case, it's also affordability to the electricity itself, how expensive it is to have electricity, and with our terrain in Africa, and also how limited infrastructure is. So I think we need to shift the conversation. Of course, focus on the social media platforms, obviously not advertising, but also focus on the barriers that are there to ensuring that people have access, not just access to our social media platforms, but access to information in general.
Yeah, and that, this is where I'm going to segue into our next speaker, because he's going to take us a step away from this focus on digital platforms and technology and get back to something both of you touched on, relevance, context, and something that as a journalist I'm very happy to hear, storytelling. So thank you, Nanjira and Emma. I appreciate having you here. Great inspiration. Thank you.